Well, let's continue our 4-week dive into the book of Philippians. Why don't we? By the way, 2 weeks from today, we'll be starting our Holy Land sermon series, straight out of context. I'm excited to share my experiences in the Holy Land with you all, and that'll start August 28th, so tune in. Philippians 1 and 2, we're going to hear some recaps today because Paul does some recapping. He says, no confidence in the flesh, and following his example. Philippians 3. Again, you might notice some themes today that you've heard before from the past 2 weeks. In chapter 3, he does some going over some of the things that he already had talked about. Starting off with our place of desolation, our difficult situation that we might find ourselves in. God is still working. That's what he reminds the Philippians of. That's what I remind you of today, that no matter how difficult your situation, God is still working and God can still work. And Paul says, keep going. Maybe this, as we kind of talked about with the kids, slow down. We don't have to always be in such a hurry, and maybe Paul wasn't specifically saying that, but maybe try the scenic route, the road less traveled, the way different that everybody else is going. The great, well, probably debatable, but let's just call him great, the great theologian Soren Kierkegaard said, most men pursue pleasure with such breathless haste that they hurry right past it. And isn't that true? And we talked about that. I think it was last week. It was one of the previous 2 weeks that we work and work and work to find that next best thing and miss what's happening right in front of us. I think that was a John Lennon reference last week. But Paul writes in verse 1, and this is Eugene Peterson's The Message version, so don't worry about following along, but he says, and that's about it, friends. Be glad in God. I don't mind repeating what I've already written in earlier letters, and I hope you don't mind hearing it again. So I hope you all don't mind hearing it again today. He says, better safe than sorry. Sometimes we need to hear a message a few times to sink in, don't we? And then it becomes, we've heard it, we recognize it. Here's a few reminders. Got milk? Help, I've fallen and I can't get up. Tastes great, less filling. Just do it. The nighttime sniffling, sneezing, coughing, aching head, fever, so you can get some rest medicine. Melts in your mouth, not in your hands, and good to the last drop. I bet each and every one of you, well, maybe not each of them, 80% of you could probably identify every single one of those companies because we've heard the message over and over. So Paul says in kind of the same way, let's go over it again, just in case, well, not just in case, because so easily we fall back on our own understanding, right? So Paul says, let's do it again, then we can talk about other matters. He says to the Philippians, again, we need reminders on context, and he was writing from prison. From prison. But saying that even though I'm in prison, the work of the gospel, the work God is doing is not going to stop. I might be behind bars, but this is still going to happen. So either you're with us or against us. And this is the same Paul. We need a reminder that he used to not be very nice to Christians. Maybe that speaks to some of us in here, that we used to persecute Christians in our own way. I know that I did at one point in my life. This is still about rejoicing, though. This is still about making a choice, Paul writes to the Philippians, and saying it is up to you, up to us, that no matter what hardship, no matter what loss, no matter what brokenness, no matter how much lack of direction that you feel in your life right now, it's still a choice to rejoice. And it's a nice, cute rhyme, and I expect you all to chant that all this week, because this is the second in 3 weeks we've talked about this. A choice to rejoice. I love that. That might be my next tattoo. Oh, oops. we're not supposed to talk about, pastors are not supposed to talk about tattoos, but enduring hard times. Life has always been hard, and it always will be hard. C.S. Lewis, you guys maybe have heard of him? He said, hardships often prepare ordinary people for extraordinary destiny. You, me, everybody in here, we're all ordinary people. Well, C.S. Lewis, you may know a thing or two about C.S. He says, hardships that we're all going to go through anyway prepare ordinary people like us for extraordinary destinies. Okay, so C.S. Lewis, let's talk about C.S. Lewis for just a second. He was an atheist. He was an atheist, and he read a book. I can't remember the name of the book, but he read a book that changed him, that changed his perspective, that helped him see things differently. So even for C.S. Lewis and Paul on the Damascus Road, encountering the risen Christ, changed the way he viewed his circumstances. He still had the same circumstances. He still had the same past, but he was no longer the same person. So C.S. Lewis decided, and this, I think this is a quote, decided to open the door that there might be something else out there. So maybe you're skeptical, or maybe you've lost faith over some events that have happened recently in your life, or have had those dark times, or been an atheist, or you know an atheist. C.S. Lewis decided to open that door. He chose. This is a choice. God did not make us robots. I don't care what anybody says. We are not robots. We have emotions, and that's why things are hard, but that's what makes it beautiful when we make the choice to rejoice. But he went on to become one of the most well-known writers in Christianity, making what was complicated. So if you're looking for a good book that's very simple on spiritual matters, Mere Christianity, read it. Even if you've read it, read it again. It's so good. He made what was complicated simple for most people. Let's talk about another example. Joseph. You might have heard of Joseph from Genesis chapter 37 through about chapter 50. The sheep shepherd, the one whose brothers were jealous of him because he was doing things, he was catching people's attention, he was making a coat of many colors, and they killed him. Well, so they thought anyway. They left him for dead by throwing him into a dry pit. Things were not looking good for Joseph. He was sold into slavery a few times. And God ended up using him, though. Even though the world left him for dead, his family left him for dead, God ended up using him in a big way, and he became the number 2 person in Egypt. So what man left for dead, C.S. Lewis, an atheist, Joseph, left for dead by his own family. C.S. Lewis spoke to skeptics through his conversion. Again, Joseph left for dead by his own family. God used them for really awesome, much different time frames. God used them for great things to further the gospel. Same with Paul being in prison here, plus Paul's past of persecuting Christians. So all things, both good and bad, it doesn't matter. All things, not good things, not bad things, God uses them in ways we can't predict. And if we don't choose to rejoice in our hardship, we will never know what God has in store for us. Here again, Paul's loss of freedom. He reminds his readers that there are going to be people that, okay, this speaks to us right now. There are going to be people trying to stop the progress that you've made, that we've made as a church maybe, that we've made in our own individual walks, that Paul, the Philippians church, over 10 years, the progress that they had made. There is people that are going to try to get in your way, to hold you back. Because when we make progress, we make others uncomfortable. The Philippian church was making people around them uncomfortable. When we make progress in our own lives, you know the type, the people that always have something negative to say. They're always telling you not to do something. Like, don't take that job. What if it doesn't work out? You have to take a pay cut, whatever it might be. The naysayers, you don't want to do that. Because maybe they're projecting their own bad experience onto you. the risk, the trip, the people that are telling you not to do those things. Play it safe, get a good job, live an average life, and have average friends. That's not the goal, right? We've talked about that before. Here's a little Pastor T advice. Those people in your life, those naysayers that suck the life out of everything and anything, why are you still investing energy in them? Why are you still trying to please them? Why are you still faking it around them? They don't care. Stop asking those kind of people, you have them in your life, you all do. Stop asking those kind of people for permission to live. They've held you back before, they're going to continue to hold you back, and whatever it is from their own life that they're projecting onto you cannot hold us back anymore. Just going to give you a second to think about who those people might be in your life. Stop giving them energy. They're putting their regret onto you. And they don't want to see you do something that they were too chicken to do their whole lives, right? Maybe we're getting a little bit away from Philippians 3, but maybe we're not. Take the road less traveled, even if you don't like the scenic route. Oh, and I brought this up at Char's funeral yesterday, but y'all remember, all 65 of you and 15 of you that might watch this online, remember that we're not getting out of this life alive. You guys remember that, right? Just this week, well, actually, ever since we decided to move up on Cemetery Hill there, I've been making a reference to people that, if we live there long enough, we'll just have to move across the street. And people, to the duplexes. No, I'm not talking about the duplexes. Cool, if we take a detour before. I'm talking about the cemetery. And people are weird about that. I've noticed in a few different situations, we're uncomfortable with death. And why is that? Why are we afraid? What are we afraid of? Because Paul says to count it all as loss. A relationship with Christ, there is no fear. There should be no fear, right? We're all going to end up there. So I think this is a reminder to make the days that we have count, not counting the days. And yes, I really meant a move across the street to the cemetery. Because I know that one day, I think, I'll be there. Okay? Our rides are all going to end, and that's something that we all have to face. In fact, in a way, we kind of come to church to prepare to die. I know that may sound morbid, but we're here to worship our Savior who says there is no death. And we will live with him in eternity where there's no more pain, where there's no more suffering, where there's no more tears forever. No one's getting out of this life alive. So maybe it's time to take a different route. Maybe that's what we hear here. C.S. Lewis, Joseph, God used them in a big way. But Paul is saying to his readers, rejoice in the midst of hardship. Again, the Philippians did not have a leader. My story, just for a quick second, because it might help somebody here. I was a nobody, looked over, had no confidence, graduated high school, barely. I mean, really, honestly, guys, 21 years ago, I think they graduated me just so they didn't have to deal with me anymore. 1.7 GPA, about to get a master's degree now. And I'm not trying to be funny about that, but I'm just saying God didn't count me out, even though I might have counted myself out. Joseph, C.S. Lewis, your story isn't over yet. The Philippians story wasn't over yet. Whatever that might mean to you in your life, God's not done with you yet. And Paul moves on later in chapter 3 and says, because of all this, I choose, there's that word again, this should have been called I choose to press on. I choose to press on. Because complaining is easy. That's why it doesn't have any value. I get these motivational text messages from different people, and that was one specifically from, I don't even think this person's a Christian. Non-Christians sometimes can add value to our lives, but the only thing missing from their lives is hope. We know that hope is never far off. And anyway, he said, complaining is easy, which is why it does not have value. And that's why rejoicing in tough times is hard. It's hard to do that because our emotions drive so much of our lives, and this is not any fun right now, and I don't feel good, and people are mean to me, and people have, whatever it might be, but we choose to rejoice. That's why it does have value, because it's difficult. Difficult things often have value, don't they? Difficult things. And sometimes the best analogy there is a workout. Why is it that doing something hard has so much residual value? What is it about pushing yourself that makes you feel good in the end? But it's hard to do it, right? Well, so is rejoicing in difficult times. So if we don't quit, God promises to bless our lives in ways that we would have never imagined. I don't think a week goes by that I don't hear somebody say, "You're a pastor?" Yeah, I am. I know you knew me before. So, if we choose to rejoice, we can't be angry at the same time with it we're rejoicing. Try it. You can't do it. It's like being mad at somebody with smiling. "Dave, I'm really upset for what you did yesterday." I mean, it just does not work. And Dave didn't do anything yesterday, by the way. That was an example. But it's really difficult. Any more than you can serve two gods, than a house divided against itself can stand. It just doesn't work. So, attitude. Look, y'all, even if, and my bank account has been in the red a lot in my life, but even if the bank account is in the red, even if the liabilities are overtaking the assets, we can still make the choice to rejoice. What comes out of our mouth, good or bad, is a good indication of what's in our heart. Just spend some time around people, and you'll probably have a pretty good indicator of the condition of their heart. Luke says in chapter 3, verse 45, that you must begin with your own lives. If you're not what you say you do, that's what counts. Your true being brims over into true words and deeds. So in other words, what he's saying is there's lots of people that can talk the talk, but what are you really like? What are you like when it's just you and your family? What do you like when nobody else is around? What do you like when you're not putting stuff on social media? So in all of that, our focus, when we focus on rejoicing, we are guarding from that which is stealing our joy. That which is stealing our joy. And we all have those things. Just living in this world in general, there will be plenty of things that will steal our joy. We don't have to go looking for them. When we rejoice, Paul says we add to our asset column. Who doesn't like to add to their asset column? We see things differently. And we realize in God, as Paul writes to the Philippians, in God, it's all lost. There is, outside of God, it's all lost. But in God, there's no liability. That's not just a cute saying. Your spouse isn't your enemy. Your family isn't your enemy. You are not your enemy. Okay, somebody needs to hear this just for a second. I hear it all the time. I've done it, the self-talk thing. Be careful with your self-talk. If you can't talk nice to yourself, if you can't have nice thoughts to yourself when nobody else is around, when nobody else even knows what you're thinking, how are you going to be able to take care of other people? That's a theme that we've had before too, right? If you can't take care of yourself, Paul said in chapter 2, do nothing out of selfish ambition, because we don't need no help being selfish. We don't need no help in that department. But if you're taking care of yourself, you'll be able to take care of other people. And rejoicing, as we've said before, and Paul writes, rejoicing in our problems doesn't mean they're not there. Doesn't mean they're not there. It just means that we know that God can work through them. God can work through them. So Paul went further, and he decided to paint the Philippians a picture through Scripture. And he says that even though boasting is not a good idea, and we should not boast, and Paul says, I know I shouldn't boast, but if I did boast, even though I shouldn't, regardless of how valuable what I'm boasting about, it is nothing in comparison to knowing Christ. There is no such thing as profit and loss when we compare it with knowing Christ, because it's all profit. Even the deepest, darkest valley that you've been in your life, God will use that for good if we count all things as nothing. It doesn't mean we need to forget about them, but Paul actually says in verse 7, go ahead, if you want, you can put verse 7 up there. He throws out all things with the trash. But whatever these things were gain to me, these things I have considered loss because of Christ. Verse 8, more than that, go back for just a second. More than that, back to verse 8, sorry. More than that, I even consider all things to be lost because of the surpassing greatness of the knowledge of Jesus Christ. Okay, now the next slide. Jesus, my Lord, for the sake of whom I have suffered the loss of all things, I consider them gain in order that I may gain Christ. So Paul basically says the things, what I had going for me is nothing, because in chapter 1 he said this isn't my life anymore. It doesn't matter that I'm in prison. It doesn't matter that we've had setbacks. God can still work through us. In fact, he goes a little bit further and he says those things, depends on what version you're reading, but those things, those accolades, those good things, those bad things, the degrees, whatever it is in our life, the vehicles, the houses, the jobs, are as valuable as, number 2. They should be treated as valuable as what we flush down the toilet, okay? I know that might be a little bit graphic, but the LEB version, which, by the way, is the most accurate version when we're translating from the original Hebrew to English, the Lexham English Bible says, like flushing the toilet, dung, good riddance to all things, because they don't matter when I compare them to knowing Christ. That's what Paul says. So if he doesn't care about them, what does he care about? He says the real value in verse 10 and 11, and sorry, I'm not sure where there we are, so that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. We rejoice with Jesus in his sufferings, his resurrection, and his conquering of death, that we may become more like him. Okay? Somebody needs to hear this. Our world needs to hear this. So y'all, if you have anybody that you need to invite to church, the world does not owe you anything. The world doesn't owe me anything. I need that reminder just as much as everybody else. But we have this culture of entitlement. I don't want to work. I need to be paid more. I need more time off. I'm better than that. Whatever it is, the world does not owe us anything. And Paul talks in chapter 2 that fellowship with Christ, I know chapter 2 was last week, there's a lot of recap here, but fellowship with Christ is giving up all things, including our rights and entitlement, because at the end of the day, Jesus could have exercised his rights and his entitlements, because he was the Son of God, right? He could have. But in obedience, he gave up all of that to die on the cross for us, for all of you, for everybody watching, for those that don't even know Christ yet. Christ died for us in obedience when he could have exercised his rights. We have a real problem in this world, don't we, with entitlement? But Paul says in verse 12 and 13 what he's not going to do. He's not going to consider, we've got this too, people that think that they've made it, that they're done, that they can float through the rest of their lives, they've retired now, they don't need to do anything else, whatever. Paul says he's not going to consider that he made it in verse 12 and 13, or that God is done with him. He says, the one thing that I will do is press on. So I say to you today, whatever it is in your life, whatever's holding you back right now, whatever's stealing your joy, make the choice to press on. Forgetting what lies behind. Pressing on doesn't mean that we forget about the past. It's just, again, C.S. Lewis, he was an atheist. Joseph was left for dead by his own family. Paul, persecuted Christians, was the worst of the worst to Christians, is now in prison. And he said, it's a change in perspective that matters. That's a recap too. We've already talked about that. There's continuing themes in the book of Philippians. There's continuing themes in the Bible. How many stories are there of overcoming hardship? It's not too late. You're not too far gone. I don't care what you've done. God doesn't care what you've done either. In fact, that thing that you don't want to talk to anybody about that you know that you've done, he can use that if you be, how do I want to say that? Be more open about it. It doesn't mean you have to go brag that one time in my life I did this and that and the other. But there's somebody else right now that's struggling through your exact situation. I think about the podcast that we did this week, Jessica. You're not paying attention again. We shared our story. I'm going to hear about that one later. I was too paying attention. We shared our story, and as hard as it is to share those difficult times, I'm talking about when Oakland passed away, the deep, dark moments, the places that I don't really like to go very often, it's painful. Jessica's much better about sharing that stuff than I am, the road we don't like to go down very often. But somebody needs to hear that because somebody else is struggling with that right now too. Not our story, maybe our story, but your story too. Wherever it's been, wherever you've been, those dark places in your life, God can use them. And our testimony matters because it brings other people to Christ. And Paul says nothing should get in the way. Nothing will get in the way, and nothing should in our own lives either. Everybody makes mistakes, but the same mistake twice is now a pattern, and patterns become regret. God is so much bigger than your past. God is so much bigger than your past. Good or bad, we press on. And he goes on to say in verse 17, he says, brothers, join me in imitating me. Become fellow imitators of me. Brothers, and observe those who walk in this way, just as you have me as an example. Paul was an example. He wanted other people to be an example. If anybody could have bragged, by the way, about their religious history or why they should be put up on a pedestal, it was Paul. He was a Pharisee. He was law-abiding. He was doing all these things right, yet he was doing so many things wrong, too. And it took a change in perspective, a change in thinking. So for all of us, as we wrap up in the next 3 or 4 minutes, all of us, the asset column is stacked. I don't care what your life feels like. I don't care, and when I say God doesn't care what you've done. I don't either, because I've made a lot of mistakes too. I'm happy to talk to you about them someday. Jessica is really happy to talk to you about them if you want to really know, because I'll probably leave some of the best ones out. But Jesus says if we seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, the rest will be added to us. So all the stuff that Paul says that we work so hard and we should just flush down the toilet, God's got that stuff taken care of anyway. So if we seek his kingdom first, the rest will be added to it. The stuff that we work so hard on ourselves, God will take care of it if we seek him first. He urged the Philippians in the last couple of verses, and go home and read chapter 3 for yourself, please. I know it's hard to preach one whole chapter in 30 minutes. But Paul urged the Philippians to want no part in those that were chasing after their own desires. And we've got a world full of people chasing after their own desires. And it ends in destruction every time. And that's kind of a problem right now. We have Christians at denominations. Guys, regardless of what side of the spectrum that you're on, we've got Christians and denominations that are more focused on politics than they are on Jesus. Politics have found their way into church, and that's a big problem. Our answer, guys, is not in Washington. It never has been, and it never will be. Our answer is in Jesus. Jesus, not Washington, is who's going to stack the asset column. Okay? Paul says nothing. And we are repeatedly warned, as Paul warns, to watch out for those who are driving us away from the gospel. Right now we got a lot of noise in this world. Barb, thank you for bringing that up. The United States, our freedom, whatever it is, politics have squeezed their way into everything. And we should be focusing on Jesus, I guess is what I'm saying, instead of politics, right? I don't care what the bank says, what the bottom line says, what your family says, what your friends say, what your fake friends say, what denominations say, what politics say, what anybody else says. You are valuable. Hear that today. Paul says a relationship with Jesus is valuable, and since when we have a relationship with Jesus, we are children of God. We are all valuable. Those unborn, those that have gone before us, they were valuable. Nothing is more valuable than aligning with God. It's all gain. Or as James says, our closing verse for today, you know it. You could probably say it with me. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And right now, guys, our faith, no matter what, where you're at with yours, is being tested. It's being tested in a big way. And let steadfastness have full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, more like Jesus, lacking in nothing. Let us pray. Gracious God, thank you for your word today. Thank you for your truth. Thank you for examples of imperfect people, your Apostle Paul, Joseph, C.S. Lewis, just some examples that we know about our own lives, how you've used things that we could have never seen ourselves for good. We are so thankful for the way that you work in our lives. Help us to be more open by choosing to rejoice and letting you work through us. In all things, we thank you most for your Son, Jesus, and our relationship, our ability to have a relationship with him. And we pray in his name today. Amen. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace.